Buenos días a todos y bienvenidos a la segunda mesa redonda virtual del Foro de Industrias Creativas Unión Europea México, organizado por la Unión Europea junto con la Secretaría de Cultura y el Centro de Cultura Digital, en la que hablaremos del papel de las industrias creativas y los clústeres y asociaciones de videojuegos en Europa y México. Mi nombre es Laura González, consejera del proyecto de apoyo a los diálogos sectoriales Unión Europea-México, que organiza esta actividad. Es un gusto para nosotros poder realizar este ciclo de 11 webinars y mesas redondas todos los días de lunes a jueves a las 8:30 de la mañana, hora Ciudad de México, 3:30 de la tarde, hora Bruselas, y que finaliza el próximo 8 de octubre. En estos paneles, expertos europeos y mexicanos analizarán la industria de los videojuegos y transmedia en la Unión Europea y en México. Les recuerdo que cada panel tiene un registro individual, con lo que para poder asistir a todos tienen que registrarse a cada uno de ellos en nuestra página web, la misma en donde se registraron para asistir a este. Aprovecho la ocasión para recordarles también que los profesionales y empresas interesados en hacer negocio se pueden registrar en la misma página web a las reuniones B2B que se realizarán 6, 7 y 8 de octubre de manera virtual. A todos los asistentes me permito recordarles algunas indicaciones sobre cómo funcionaremos el día de hoy. Les agradeceremos que las preguntas que surjan las escriban en el apartado de preguntas y respuestas y no en el chat. Y que especifiquen a cuál de los panelistas se dirigen, ya que todos ellos estarán contestándolas al final del webinar. Las grabaciones de los webinars estarán disponibles ahí mismo en nuestra página web en la segunda mitad de octubre. Como algunos de nuestros panelistas hablan inglés y otros español, les recordamos que tenemos habilitado el servicio de interpretación. Aquí abajito verán un botón que pone interpretación. En él pueden escoger el audio, ya sea español, inglés o audio neutro que escucharán el idioma original de cada una de los panelistas. Es importante señalar que si se están conectando a través del navegador y no de Zoom, no tendrán la opción de escoger idioma. Además, al final de la sesión les pediremos a todos que enciendan sus cámaras para poder hacer una gran foto de grupo. No se preocupen si ahora no tienen habilitada esa opción, es a propósito, cuando llegue el momento sí la tendrán. También al final de la sesión les pondremos en el chat y más tarde les mandaremos por mail una encuesta de satisfacción que es muy importante que respondan para que podamos tener en cuenta su opinión de cara a futuros eventos. Demos paso de momento al panel de hoy, moderado por Cristina Novio, Team Leader del proyecto de apoyo a los diálogos sectoriales Unión Europea-México. Les presento a nuestro panel de lujo. JP Caleva, director de operaciones de la Asociación Europea de Desarrolladores de Videojuegos. Camille Donegat, representante de Immersive de Irlanda. Y Kopi Hiltun, director de la Asociación Finlandesa de Neogames de Finlandia. Muchas gracias, Cristina, todo tuyo. Saludos.
Muchas gracias, Laura. Buenos días en México, buenas tardes en Europa. Quiero darles la más cálida bienvenida a esta segunda sesión de nuestro Foro de Industrias Creativas Unión Europea-México, centrado en el área de videojuegos y que hoy abordará el tema del rol que tienen las asociaciones, clústeres, forums y en general cualquier tipo de asociación de la industria de desarrollo del software, videojuegos y servicios relacionados. Hablar de las asociaciones implica necesariamente hablar de la evolución de la industria y de los mercados, dado que son organizaciones que se crean y moldean para dar respuesta a las necesidades de las empresas y profesionales, ¿no? Y que evolucionan a medida que surgen retos específicos que las empresas o los profesionales no pueden solucionar de forma individual. Por tanto, nos interesa especialmente el papel de estas asociaciones y también el conocimiento que tienen del mercado. Es importante recordar que la industria de videojuegos es hoy en día la industria de entretenimiento de mayor volumen mundial, con más de 152.000 millones de dólares en ventas. Quiero pasar la palabra a los ponentes para que nos expliquen un poco, nos cuenten un poco las asociaciones bien que dirigen o de las que son parte, cuántos miembros tienen, qué tipo de empresas forman parte de cada una de ellas, etcétera. Y con esto, bueno, voy a dar la palabra en primer lugar a Camille Donegan. Camille, por favor, si nos puedes hablar de la organización a la que perteneces. Gracias.
Of course. Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here from Ireland. And yeah, I'd like to share a few slides with you to give you some context for the reason I'm on this panel today. So let me just select the right one. I guess screen is fine. So this is our website, actually, immersive.com, but that's not what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you some slides. So just for context, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my background. So I actually worked in software. So I worked by day, like programming computers in the bank, and it was really boring. And then at night, I was an actor and a theater maker. So I had 15 years of parallel careers in the arts and in technology. And one of them like paid my bills and the other one like fed my soul. And then nearly 6 years ago, actually, I went to a conference, and at this conference there was a Danish installation by a creator called Mads Dambo. And Mads had created a virtual reality theater piece, really. So there was, you can see the picture in the bottom left-hand corner. So there was a dinner table setting, so a physical set, and on each of the places was this black device. I had heard of virtual reality. This is like early 2015, but I had not tried it. So this was the Oculus DK1, the very first commercially available headset. So I put on the headset and I got transported into the eyes of this character. So I was the father in this family dinner scene, and it was completely explosive in my mind. I saw the instant potential for this medium, and that was it. I ran out of the conference and I left my job in the bank and started a virtual reality meetup. So this was really important for me. There was no jobs, there was no industry. And yet I started a meetup, and people started to come who were interested in this medium. And some of those people are part of the group that I will be talking about today. So just a little bit about current projects I'm working on. I'm actually very fortunate to be part of a European consortium. We're working for 3 years on a project called Traction. And Traction is all about bringing opera, with the art form of opera, which can be seen to be elitist around Europe, and our remit is to break down barriers and boundaries about opera, and also to co-create opera with communities. So we are working with disenfranchised communities in Portugal, Spain and Ireland to co-create opera through novel formats. So in 3 years, I will be talking to you hopefully and sharing a virtual reality opera that we are touring around Europe and disseminating through the EU. And then on the commercial side, I guess, I've just completed, and we've just launched Solace Fior, which is a virtual reality meditation app. So if you want to come to Ireland, but you can't at the moment, you can even get a free demo if you have a headset on the Oculus Go store, and go to a beautiful place in Ireland. It's actually the place in this picture, Glendalough Lake, and you can have like a meditation, or you can hear a story from Ireland, or you can do some breathing techniques. So this is a really good use for, it's stressful times at the moment, so I think it's really important, this project. So I'm here today on behalf of Immersive. So Immersive is a cluster organization representing the immersive technology sector in Ireland. And really we came together because we were very inspired by the activity we could see in the United Kingdom. So in the UK, since 2009, in fact, they have been investing very heavily in the immersive technology sector. They saw the train coming and they bet on this sector, and they were right to do that. And it's really paying off for them in terms of the revenue from the sector. So the UK government, through Innovate UK, have a body, an organisation called Immerse UK. So we looked at Immerse UK and we wished we had something like this in Ireland. So we came together, and that is why we formed, really. So we are a united voice for the sector. We are 14 companies with somewhere between 150 and 200 staff, depending on the current projects. And we want to talk much more with government and look for funding and look to be stronger together. So that's really why we came together, is because we believe, and we've seen the success in the UK when many companies can come together, that there can be huge benefits to this. And we really believe that Ireland has the technology capability and the creative capability to be a leader in this sector. We understand storytelling, it's in our DNA. We have a very strong cultural identity, which the world mostly loves, and we're very proud of our culture. So these mediums are very much a mixture of creative and technology sector, and it's also opening the road for females. So my background was technology, but I worked always with all guys, which I enjoyed very much. But now with this sector, because it's a very creative area of technology, we are seeing many, many women. And in the US, for example, the split is 50-50 between women in immersive technology and men. So this is amazing. And the UK has similar statistics, and we're also tracking this in Ireland. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to stop sharing now. And yeah, I look forward to answering more questions as the talks continue.
Gracias, Camil. Bueno, paso la palabra al siguiente de nuestros ponentes hoy, Papel, por favor.
Yeah, and I think that you can see me. Yeah. I'm Kope Hilton. I'm the director of the Neo Games, and I have been in digital media. About my background, I have been in digital media 26 years, and I have been more involved to the games last 16 years. Basically, all the time the Neo Games has been existing. And about Neo Games, we are basically a membership-based organization. I can share my slides. And Neo Games was first established in 2003. And basically, we have been following the development of the Finnish games industry last 17 years or 16 years. At the moment, we have around 130 members, and our members, they range from big companies, big game developer companies, to one-man studios and everything in between. And since we are not the studio organization only, we have members as service providers and also game education facilities, our members. And so we are basically an umbrella organization of the Finnish games industry. And our approach to the game industry has always been the ecosystem development. So what we have been trying to do all the time is trying to develop all the levels of the Finnish game industry ecosystem. And as you know, the Finnish game industry ecosystem is actually quite good at the moment. Finland is one of the leading countries in Europe when it comes to the game development. And our turnover has annually been over 2 billion euros last 5 years. And what we do, so basically, we have a lot of things in our table always, but the basic things we have been doing during last years is, for instance, organizing trade missions to the international events. And obviously that is something we haven't been able to do during last 6-7 months. So we haven't had any trade missions this year, but we hope that in the next year or year after that we are able to do those again. We coordinate different kind of cross-industry development projects, so between game industry and other industries, but also inside the game industry. So creating bridges between different branches of game industry. Our members are basically from all around the game industry. There is VR, AR studios, there is mobile studios, there is PC console studios. The only thing which is excluded from our digital game portfolio is gambling. So we don't do gambling, or gambling companies are not our members. We do a lot of cooperation with ministries in Finland and with the political sector in general. And we also cooperate a lot in political sector with other EU countries. And J.P. from EGDF can explain a little bit more about that. It's an old story, started already in 2007, but J.P. can explain more about that. We organize different kind of domestic networking events. For instance, once a month we have this kind of executive breakfast for CEOs of the companies. We have other kind of events we organize, and we also cooperate with other Finnish game industry organizations. There is altogether 5 game industry organizations in Finland, and we cooperate. Where we don't have a competition between those organizations, we rather cooperate with them. What we do quite a lot also is promoting media relations, and it has been during the COVID, the media relations have been quite a crucial part of our work, since we haven't been able to contact them in traditional way in trade missions or trade events. We have been using our network for promoting the Finnish games industry. And of course, what we do also is that we make surveys and reports related to the Finnish game industry, but we also investigate different markets. So last time we were investigating the Asian markets, Korea, Japan, and China. But those are some things we do. That's very brief introduction to our activities.
Muchas gracias, Cope. Le cedo la palabra a Jari-Pekka Kaleva. Jari, por favor, si nos puedes hablar de la organización que representas.
Okay, thank you so much. Cope, could you please stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, I will do that. I will do that.
My side. Okay. So, good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on which part of the world you are based in. I'm Jari-Pekka Kaleva. I work as a COO of the European Games Developer Federation, EGDF. And I'm today here to tell you a little bit about our activities and give an European perspective to the panel. So, EGDF doesn't have any direct corporate members. We unite 19 trade associations all around Europe under our umbrella and focus on representing them in Brussels and helping them to contribute in building best possible European policies for the game developers. Beyond that, we of course provide a platform for sharing best practices and especially we are aggregating European data and trying to build joint European figures about the state of the European games industry. Beyond that, we have a number of cooperation groups, for example, on best practices on implementing data protection framework, or help this kind of peer support group for organizing games industry events and trade missions, and so on and so on. Altogether, EGDF member associations represent more than 2,500 game developer studios altogether, there are around 5,000 game developer studios and publishers in Europe, so we represent more than half of them. And those studios employ over 40,000 people, and altogether there are about 80,000 people working in the European games industry. So yeah, also on that side, we have about half of them under our umbrella. So just about our data collection, we were finally able to close the figures from 2018 in mid-2020. The delay is coming from the fact that it takes in some countries significant amount of time to companies to register their numbers to the trade registers and our members to collect them from there. But based on that data, there are at the moment around 4,900 game developer studios in Europe, about 100 game publishers, and altogether they employ about 8,000 people, as said. So for these companies, one of the key topics is access to funding. And on that side, what EGDF is doing to help these companies that are of course based in a number of European countries, we are first of all helping them to access the European funding instruments like Horizon Europe on R&D side or Creative Europe on cultural funding side. But beyond that, we are also facilitating the development of state aid framework on national level. And France, for example, was one of the first European countries to launch their national tax break instrument for games industry. It was quickly followed by the UK, with its own tax break instrument. And just last year, Germany, for example, introduces its own grant-based instruments where they are giving about 50 million euros per year for the local industry. So that is, of course, one of our core areas to help our members to build best possible support instruments for games industry. And second big challenge that we are trying to facilitate and help our members on is access to talent. At the moment, it's one of the biggest obstacles for the growth of the European industry. And what we can do on the European level, of course, there are two ways. The first focus area is games education. And a number of our members, like the Finnish Association, COPE is representing, are also representing games education institutions. And of course, we are then trying to share studies, best practices on how to build best possible games education, securing that there is new generations of talent emerging every year from all European countries. And the second big challenge on that side for us is, of course, the talent attraction. How to secure that in the world that is now closing down, we can keep the borders open and secure that European companies have access to best talent on the global level, and the people are able to move to Europe as easily and as quickly as possible. And of course, in the access to talent side, one of the key challenges is also the diversity. Games industry has been very male-dominated for years, and I'm happy to see that the situation is year by year getting better, and we are seeing more and more females entering the industry. And also, we see more diversity in other minority groups in the industry. And but that's a slow process. And also on that side, we are sharing best practices among our members and supporting them in their diversity initiatives on national level. And then the last big topic is access to markets. And as Kope mentioned, Finland is actually one of the biggest countries in terms of the industry turnover. Unfortunately, we don't have the data from Germany, France, and the UK at the moment, so it's definitely not the biggest country in terms of the turnover in Europe, but yeah, let's say among the 5 biggest ones, closely followed by Sweden. But what this clearly demonstrates that even the small European countries are able to actually build up huge games industries that compete on the global level against companies from San Francisco, Tokyo, Sydney, wherever on earth. And that's the beauty of the industry. The location in the end doesn't matter, because you can go immediately to the global markets and compete with your great games against other games all over the globe. Of course, competition is hard, but so are the opportunities as well. But the challenge on that side is that global markets are increasingly getting fragmented, especially on the regulatory side. So on the European regulation, one of our key guiding principles is to minimize the regulatory fragmentation of the digital single market area and encourage the European Commission to do the same on the global level and secure that one of the key priorities of the European trade policy would be to minimize the regulatory fragmentation also on the global digital markets. So thank you. Don't hesitate to contact me if you have any further questions.
Muchas gracias. Un poco al hilo de las presentaciones que hemos ido viendo, me gustaría preguntarle a los ponentes cuáles son los servicios que más demandan las empresas del sector. Hemos visto en la presentación, en la última presentación, creo recordar, que hay una importante participación de pequeñas y medianas empresas, de pymes, y me gustaría saber, o me gustaría que nos expliquen un poco cuál es su perspectiva de cuáles son los servicios que más necesitan. No sé si es un tema de financiación o de acceso a mercados. Le cedo la palabra para responder a esto en primer lugar a Papel, por favor. Papel.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm a little bit slow with my mouse. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I think that it depends on a company. So what the small companies are looking for most is the networks, funding, publisher contacts, that kind of stuff. So they are looking for investors, networks, and publishers. The big companies are a little bit different. They are looking for instance, subcontracting. Since nowadays game development is quite often well distributed, so companies use subcontractors, but they are also looking for best practices, and in some cases in many cases they are looking for, instance, regulatory advice. And as Ipe mentioned, they are also looking for this kind of peer support from the other companies. For instance, with the GDPR, one of the keys how we were able to tackle the GDPR, the European privacy GDPR legislation, was that we had a coalition of companies doing that work together. So basically, different kind of companies are looking for different kind of things. But one of the things at the moment is that basically what we are all lacking is that this online environment is not optimal for this kind of activities, because seeing people live would be easier way to establish different kind of new connections.
Okay.
That was it.
Gracias. Gracias. Bueno, me recuerdan mis compañeros que les recuerde que tienen abajo en el panel de preguntas y respuestas la posibilidad de hacer preguntas a los diferentes participantes. Solo tienen que escribir su pregunta y a quién va dirigida. Y bueno, retomo la cuestión de cuáles serían los servicios más demandados por las empresas. No sé si Jari Pekka puede opinar al respecto. Jari, cuando quieras.
As Kope mentioned, it totally depends on the type of the company. Something that perhaps Kope didn't cover so much are the early stage startups. And in the games industry, it's particularly difficult to find funding for a first round startup studio because the risks of failure are so high. So that's something where we have been particularly active in building this kind of support instruments. Some countries have taken a grant-based approach, providing SME grants for launching the studio. Other countries have more focused on incubators and accelerators and supporting their games industry startups through them. But in any case, it's clear that if you are a group of young people just graduated from some kind of higher education targeting games industry, you need some support on the launching of your first company. And also in failing, that's something that's really crucial to keep in mind, that many of the games industry companies go bankrupt, and building some kind of safety net that enables those talented people who have failed with their first company to start their second company that quite often is much more successful as quickly as possible. is something that really needs to be area of the focus for the member states of the European Union. And on a global level, as Kope mentioned, it's the regulatory issues are now increasing. So before it was really easy for all companies, big and small, to enter the global markets. But now there is more and more this kind of regulatory market access barriers that need to be tackled. And information that different embassy networks on the European level, on the global level, can provide for the European companies is, of course, highly important on that side. And also, we hope to see that whenever there is any kind of trade agreement emerging between any country, between the European Union and that country, there would be this kind of SME information package about the local regulatory requirements for the game developer studios, so that it would be as easy as possible to enter the foreign markets for European companies to go to that countries, but also for the companies outside European Union to enter European markets that have one of the most complicated regulatory frameworks for game development in the world.
Gracias. Quiero dirigirles una pregunta esta vez a los tres, que es cómo ven las tendencias en el sector actualmente. ¿Hay más inversión en investigación y desarrollo? ¿Hay una tendencia más hacia el uso de dispositivos móviles? ¿Cuáles creen que son las principales tendencias? Y les voy a pedir, por favor, a los tres si pueden mantener las cámaras encendidas. Yo creo que es más fácil la comunicación. Camille, tal vez quieres empezar tú.
Yeah, sure. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about the games industry in Ireland. I spoke with my colleagues earlier that run the cluster organisation for games in Ireland, which is called IMIRT, I-M-I-R-T. And as you can see from some of the slides we just saw, Ireland is in the top 5 of this industry, and it's also thriving with animation. There's an important tax credit available in Ireland for the film industry. This is called Section 481. And it has been absolutely imperative to the multi-billion film industry that Ireland now has. So we had Game of Thrones filming here, Vikings, Star Wars, all of these big productions are coming to Ireland because of this tax incentive where they can claim back between 32 and 37% in tax. The games industry in Ireland have been fighting to get the same credit for games. It nearly happened a few years ago, I believe, but instead there was some incentives made for R&D specifically. So this is something that we are looking at in Ireland for the game sector, and also this will also apply for my sector, the immersive technology sector, because we have to have like the government supports and the tax credit capabilities for the sector to really, really thrive. What we do have, we have a fund called the Disruptive Technologies Fund. So it's not specific to immersive technologies, but it does incorporate them. So it can be for AI, robotics, 5G, autonomous vehicles, all of these sectors, but also covering immersive technology solutions. And there's 500 million of funding available within this fund. So this is a great start, but we would like to see more as well about to have some more incentives possible. And please, Christina, remind me of the question, because I know that was really my comment on the last question.
Sí, bueno, la pregunta eran un poco las tendencias que están viendo. De todas maneras, ha sido interesante saber sobre el tema de la financiación y el apoyo público al sector en Irlanda, pero la pregunta va más del lado de cómo ven las tendencias en el sector.
We've had a lot of movement since COVID. In the last few months, there has been a lot of adoption of virtual reality headsets globally. So this is a good step, but also the flip side is there has been some negative impact around location-based entertainment. So the predictions from the immersive technology sector was that for the next 3 years, most people, most consumers would go somewhere to experience virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality. However, with COVID, all of these establishments have closed down, unfortunately, and there's not a huge appetite for people to go and share headsets, no matter what we say about the hygiene protocols, using UV light, etc., to sterilize. It's still a concern for people, which I can completely understand. So what is really important is that the companies in Ireland are getting the funding they need to thrive, and this is happening. So we had 2 recent funding announcements. Volograms is a volumetric capture studio here in Dublin, and they received 1.5 million in private investment just last month. And Vray, VRAI, they have a training platform for hazard training in virtual reality, and they recently received 1.2 million in funding. These are just 2 examples of quite a significant amount of investment and seed funding that has become available to the immersive technology sector. This sector is very new, but it is really taking off very quickly, and it's combining so much of what we know already from film, technology, games. It's really bringing a lot of these skills together. That's it.
Gracias. ¿Qué opina el resto sobre las tendencias de la industria? Cualquiera de los dos, Yari, Cope.
Perhaps I start this time.
Yes, please do. I'll follow.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that one of the trends in the industry is that growth of the games industry is going to continue over the next decades. As more and more global population enters the internet and has access to latest devices. In the 2000s, the growth was on the PC and console. In 2010s, it was on mobile, but console and PC didn't really go anywhere. And 2020s, there will be something new emerging, hopefully at least, because there is also year by year more competition in these markets, and it's harder and harder to enter existing platforms for new studios. So whenever something new emerges, this is always a big opportunity. So it's also one of the reasons why we have been really welcoming the new subscription services and so on that have provide new market access opportunities. Something we have also seen during the last decade is that the global focus in 2010s moved from the United States to Asia. Especially to China is now one of the leading markets in games industry, but also South Korea and Japan and increasingly Indonesia are important market areas. And that's going to have a big impact on the industry on the long run. We are still really focused on what happens in the United States, but increasingly new platforms are emerging from the Asia. And then perhaps the fourth thing, talent shortage. It's one of the big things for the industry that is only going to get worse because there are more and more successful studios. So games industry as something that is ahead of the technological development, a real pioneer and pathfinder of the new emerging forms of artistic expression, new business models, and new ways of using technology to create artistic content. There are very few cutting-edge people doing that. So the competition on having those people in your team, that's going to get only harder. And as I already said, regulatory fragmentation and this kind of from global to regional markets, it's going to increase in the long run. And what we are afraid to see in the future is digital trade wars emerging increasingly between different markets like United States and China, United States and the EU and so on. And this will create significant regulatory uncertainty for the companies on how to access the global markets. Yeah, Hope, please fulfill the case.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned quite a lot of things which are also in my radar, which is no wonder since we are working in the same organization basically. But I would like to add some things. One of them is 5G. That's something we have been talking a little bit about Finland. 5G is going to be here in future years. It's a new technology which will bring some possibilities for distribution of games, including streaming gaming. So we already have this kind of streaming service or services for games, and one of the future prospects we see is that there will be more this kind of services like Apple Arcade, which is basically streaming service for games. About the VR and AR, surprisingly many Finnish studios are at the moment at least trying with the AR, and there is actually some applications. For instance, Next Games will make the Walking Dead AR game, and they are developing Blade Runner Walking Dead AR game. So it's surprisingly a widespread thing, the AR, I mean. But at the moment, I feel that after Pokemon Go, we haven't really seen any breakthroughs in that area. So we haven't found, as an industry, we haven't yet found a way how to utilize AR properly with the gameplay. So it's still kind of add-on in many games, but hopefully in future years we can see some development in that sector also. At the moment, I don't believe, so much about VR in the games, because 4 or 5 years ago there was huge investments to the VR games, but at the moment we don't have any devices, or the device fragmentation in VR side in the consumer markets is quite high. And at the moment it seems that VR is more on the B2B market, so creating VR applications to the B2B is at the moment more prominent than creating actual VR games as such. What we are going to see in the future is consolidation. I guess that one of those reasons is that there is a lot of interest, at least in Finland, there is a lot of interest to create bigger units, bigger game studios. And one way of doing that in this situation when we have shortage of employees is to actually acquire another studio. So that's something we are maybe going to see in the future. I trust that mobile is going to do well also in the future. Either is it a free to download model, or is it arcade model, but mobile is not going to go anywhere. But at the same time, we have seen that at least when it comes to the first round studios and startup studios, the PC has gained popularity. And the reason for that is that it's easier to be seen in the PC side. The marketing budgets are way smaller in the PC side. And I think that one of the things we are going to see, I don't know when it's going to happen, but there might be a little drop in the games market in future years. And that's due to the COVID-19. I kind of expect that the purchasing power in the main market areas, which for the Finnish game developers are in Northern America and Asia and Europe at the moment, is going to cause at least some kind of turmoil in 21, 22, 23. But that's something to be seen, since there is no way to predict what is going to happen, since we don't have any historical data about how this kind of economical or financial distress is going to affect, for instance, to the free-to-play mobile market. But I agree, Jipe, about the trade wars and regulatory burden and that kind of stuff, which are also going to be some of the future prospects. So that's was my take on trends.
Bueno, han mencionado muchas cosas, muchas gracias. Me he quedado pensando en la versión de realidad aumentada de The Walking Dead, tiene que ser terrorífica. Una de las preguntas que les íbamos a hacer justamente era sobre el COVID, sobre la pandemia. Yo inicialmente pensaba que debería haber tenido un efecto positivo en la industria, en el sentido de que cuando la gente está en casa y se aburre, pues es bastante probable que acaben comprándose una consola o jugando en línea. Y sin embargo, Cope, comentas que más bien prevés que hay una recesión por la bajada de capacidad económica. Yo creo que, no sé si podemos elaborar un poco más sobre el impacto que puede tener la pandemia en la industria. ¿Qué opina el resto?
Actually, do I do this or do you? Because we made a study about this in each EDF level.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so in short run, what we have seen is that the number of gamers, number of the players inside the game, or download numbers of the games have increased. And in some cases, of course, if you have a console game, or basically paid download or that kind of game, it increases the turnover of your company, or turnover or revenue of your game. But when it comes to the in-app purchase games, typically when the number of players increase, it doesn't mean that actually the revenue increases, because most of the players don't use so much money inside the game. So let's put it this way, that if the number of players increases with 50%, the turnover or revenue of the game increases only 5 to 10%, because not all of the players are going to use any money, are not going to use any money inside the game. So what we have this year, basically, I guess that if you think about the revenue or turnover of the Finnish game industry, I don't see any drop happening this year. We have a lot of good games. There is a lot of good games out at the moment with a steady player base, and those are going to be successful also this year, and maybe, hopefully in the future years. But we don't know how the consumers are going to react if their purchasing power drops in future years. So are they going to play or spend less money inside the games than before? And that's what I was referring about the possible future prospects of this, or consequences of this COVID-19. But I don't know, Camille and Ipe, what do you think about that? Camille, do you have any kind of, what is your kind of take on this?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear all of these statistics about in-app purchases, because from a personal perspective, the meditation application that I just mentioned, so it's available on the Oculus Go and Android and iOS stores. And actually it's a subscription platform. So in a way, we are trying something new. There are very few immersive technology subscription-based models that exist. There is one that's in the same sector, the wellness sector, called TRIP, TRIPP. It's a really great experience, but the consumer market, we're waiting to see if they have a desire to pay for a subscription model for immersive technology solutions. What time will tell, but it's very new, and obviously the focus for, say, Oculus has been games. So the entertainment sector is the most important one to them. However, they are looking shortly at the wellness sector, and we're going to see a lot more apps that are being tracked. So all of your fitness, your biofeedback, your biometrics will be tracked, and you will be able to see how much fitter you are from like playing lots of Beat Saber, for example. So also coming with this, the wellness sector, there will be soon, through Oculus, subscription possibilities and subscription models. And this is important for the sector, because like what we saw with mobile apps before is if lots of things are free, people expect everything to be free. And this is not sustainable. And sure, in-app purchases are great, but as Kopi mentioned, they can be problematic. And I know in my own house, we have lots of, no, you're not buying the extra armor for your character, forget about it. No, 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 no. So you have a lot of parents around the world saying no to these in-app purchases, which are crazy, what you pay for a skin or a dance, or, but it's also lots of fun, and important for the industry that we have these in-app purchases. So I guess in short, the immersive technology sector is not as defined as games or mobile apps. So we're trying different models, and we're trying to see, but B2B enterprise solutions are definitely the focus for all of the companies in immersive, because the B2C market is not mature enough. There's just not enough headsets, and most of us are also focusing on training solutions, because this is where companies are willing to try. They know the statistics around how impactful virtual reality in particular can be, but also augmented reality, especially for remote viewing. So if I'm working in an office and I need to communicate with somebody who's out on the field, we can do this through augmented reality. And there's a company called Utility AR that's part of Immersive that is doing implementing this technology, and this is selling well. So it's about finding the use cases and then seeing how to capitalize on them. But the B2C market is definitely a challenge at the moment.
Perhaps to just add something that has not been mentioned so far. So we often, when we talk about COVID-19, the focus is on the markets and the companies that already are in the markets. But unfortunately, there are also lots of early stage startup studios that didn't quite make it to the markets before the current pandemic started. And those are the ones that are truly in a challenging situation at the moment, because all the global events have been cancelled, and those were the places where you are building your contacts, your networks, closing your first publisher or investment deals. And how we are able to support those SMEs in this new situation on access to publishing these and investment deals defines if we are going to see this kind of lost generation of startups in the industry or not. And another big thing having an impact on that is, of course, how different countries all around the globe are going to kickstart their economies after the COVID-19 outbreak, and the role digital growth and supporting this kind of digital first SMEs are going to have in those new instruments. It's going to define if we will see more invest in the games, or if that public support is going to other places. And one thing is for sure, it's going to be really difficult times for the governments now to decide where to invest when they have less and less tax income available because of the looming global depression.
Una duda que me ha surgido a medida que hablabas, Yari. ¿Tenéis algún tipo de estadística sobre qué porcentaje de empresas sobrevive a su primer año en el sector?
I suppose this is better answered by Kope, but in general, it's of course depends on if you are entering the mobile games or console games or PC games. It's different market segments. And also, if you are the first round studio, yeah, it's difficult. But if you are the second round studio with lots of experience, yeah, most of them make for the first year. But based on the data we got on our European level survey, it was looking like big percentage, about 30% of the companies only had the runway a few months left. So hopefully we have more European data next year to know where it goes. But Kope, please reply to this from the more hands-on perspective from the Finnish level.
Yeah, I would say that typically game companies can survive. Even the first round game companies, they survive like 2 years. So it's not, nothing happens in a year, because the investment for the game developer company in the development phase before you go to the user acquisition and marketing, especially in mobile side, they are quite small. They are quite small, and typically those entrepreneurs are not paying salaries to themselves in the very first phases of the company, and they are basically scheming everything they can. And I don't know what is the life expectancy of the first round company. What I know is that in Finnish game industry in 25 years, there has been plus 600 companies, and now we have 240 companies left. left. So mortality rate in 25 years has been around 58, 60%. And I guess that when it comes to the first round game developer studios, I would say that maybe 10 to 15% of them are going to be somewhat successful, and rest of those are going to in 2 or 3 or 4 years they are ceasing, so stopping the game development, moving to the other sectors, for instance to the IT, or they are going into bankrupt. So survival rate is maybe, I would say 15 to 20 if we talk about actually creating lucrative business in game development. And I have quite often said that and this comes to the first round studios, I mean those studios which are basically established by people who are coming straight from the education, starting up their first studio. The story is different, as Ipe mentioned, when you have a second round studio, so you have previous experience about the game industry. But I have quite often said that in the games industry, the first studio is often a continuation to the education. It's a business, it's practicing business in real life level. And for that reason, Ipe already mentioned it, it's very important that we have a safety network for those people who have tried, but they have failed with their first company. They have a possibility to set up the second company, so that or get employed by bigger companies. And that's something we have been also trying to create in Finland, and we have been also trying to create in European level this kind of safety network and this kind of ecosystem where people with talents can continue without no stigma in the industry.
Un poco de la mano de este tema estaba pensando qué tanto en Europa en general, si pueden hablarnos de esto, existen apoyos o financiación pública justamente para apoyar el sector, o qué tanto se financian de forma privada. Cualquiera de los tres, por favor.
Should I start, perhaps?
Please.
So it depends completely from the country. Unfortunately, there are some countries in Europe where the only available funding instruments for games industry are coming from the European level. And then there are some countries where there have established existing instruments like Germany, France, Finland, and so on. But in general, what is perhaps curious in that side is that what the Finnish experience, for example, demonstrates is that if you have a successful R&D instruments like the ones provided by Business Finland, it can be so that if the Business Finland is providing funding for a game developer studio, it means that certain sanity check for the company has been done, and now investors on the global level are seeing it as some like of a merit that the public sector has been investing in this company, because they really know that Business Finland has an excellent experts in game development, and they know the industry very well. So if you are able to build up your national support instruments in the right way, it can also work in a way that it attracts global investments. For Finnish industry has been focused on R&D support instruments, and let me say, Finnish games are technological and business model-wise really doing very well, but some have sometimes criticized that the artistic boundaries are pushed in some other countries, and it's coming from the fact that Finland doesn't have cultural production support instruments. And you can see that, for example, in Denmark, there are more this kind of art for art's sake, pioneering artistic game developer studios, because their public support instruments are more focused on cultural side. And the same in Germany, actually, because they have also this kind of state aid instruments on that side. So yeah, the public support instruments are available in many countries, and they to some extent also define the nature and the focus of the industry, because they direct the focus a little bit. But still, private funding is always needed, and unfortunately only during the perhaps last 5 to 7 years we have started to see truly European risk funding emerging, and before that, and still largely today in many countries in Europe, companies are relying on non-European private venture capital investments, mainly from the United States and perhaps China, and now also, of course, UK, because they unfortunately left the European Union, so we have to see them as this kind of an external funding country.
Camille, tú nos habías contado antes algo sobre justamente la financiación pública en Irlanda. No sé si quieres ampliar esto. Y también me gustaría preguntarles a los tres qué tanto conocen financiación europea como tal, como parte de la financiación que ofrece la Unión Europea en programas como Creative Europe, por ejemplo. Hay otros, pero Horizon 2020, etcétera.
Yeah. So yeah, just to reiterate some of the supports we have in Ireland that are very successful. So the tax incentive for film, Section 481, hopefully the games industry will also have access to this tax credit in the near future, and the Disruptive Technologies Fund of 500 million. So these are the main funds we have available from our government. We have a very active representative body for startups and established companies, Enterprise Ireland. So Enterprise Ireland is the go-to place. You are some sort of startup business, you go to them, they mentor you, they bring you through the supports available. So there's lots of small grants that you can access to get on your feet and to penetrate new markets. So without this mentorship, there will be, the startup scene is very, very bustly in Ireland and very busy and very active and very successful, and this is very much thanks to Enterprise Ireland, and they are also supporting the immersive technology sector, and they have a dedicated person within there who looks at our sector and follows it and tracks it and supports funding initiatives. And the funding that some of my colleagues in Immersive received in recent months that I mentioned, Volograms and Vray, this was through a venture capital fund that has an office in Ireland. So it's specifically really down to one individual called Barry Downs. He was also behind VR Education Holdings, Immersive VR Education, who actually went on the stock market to raise funds, and they raised £6 million when they floated. So this is another way to raise money that has worked very well for this particular company, who have a VR education platform and also some successful VR experiences like the Apollo 11 experience. So these are the funds that are available, but of course we would like some more. And remind me, Christina, the second part of your question.
Sí, me refería si se utiliza también financiación europea como proveniente de la Unión Europea, o sea, como concepto Unión Europea, no de otros países de la Unión Europea, sino Comisión Europea, algunos programas europeos que específicamente apoyan las industrias creativas, o tal vez no es tan conocida esta financiación, ¿no? Es lo que...
Well, as I mentioned, the Traction project is a European project. So this is funding from the EU. So there are 9 members in the consortium from Portugal, Ireland and Spain. And it's just an absolute pleasure and joy, because the rest of the time I work commercially, to be working on a research project. So we're looking at novel formats and also the co-creation process with communities. Without the European funding, we would not have the resources to make these investigations. And already we have, really created some progressive studies and papers and academic results from our engagement with the communities. And the purpose really at the end of these 3 years of this European project is to have created a series of recommendations for industry, for anybody in Europe who would like to embrace novel formats, and that can be interactive video as well as immersive technology solutions. So I think this project, Traction, is a really great example of what can be possible. And we have like a very defined ethics policy, very progressive methodology around how we engage with communities. We have an expert on participatory art. In Ireland, we're partnered with Irish National Opera, who are our main opera company here in Ireland, and also Liceo in Barcelona is part of this. They are the Grand Opera House in Barcelona. And obviously theatres and opera houses have been severely impacted by COVID. So I've had, my background is theatre. Many people from theatre have phoned me and reached out to me and said, help, you know, what are we going to do? Our sector is completely decimated. We don't see any hope. So I've been mentoring many theatre makers to embrace digital tools and bringing them through not just immersive technology solutions, but this is my favorite thing to talk about. So actually many of these theatre makers are now talking to Enterprise Ireland. They're creating apps like storytelling apps, augmented reality solutions, and interactive video and website solutions. So this is really amazing to be able to empower creative people to embrace new skills that they maybe were afraid of before. And it's really just an education piece. People need to understand how these work, and they don't need to be able, what I talk a lot about is how you don't have to do everything yourself. You don't have to learn how to code in Unity or Unreal to work in this sector. I'm a producer. I understand a lot of the specifics of design and development, and I have a software background, but you don't need this. You just need people like me, people who understand the industry and can help you navigate and connect you with developers. Like resources like Upwork are just integral to people trying and looking to embrace these mediums.
Ok, gracias. En algún momento han mencionado el tema de que existen diferentes regulaciones en los países. Entiendo que se están refiriendo a derechos de propiedad intelectual o a otro tipo de regulaciones. En cualquier caso, ¿cómo ven el tema de la protección de derechos de propiedad intelectual en un sector en el que normalmente intervienen diferentes creadores y empresas? Es decir, por ejemplo, en un videojuego pues tenemos pues a alguien que hará el diseño gráfico, alguien que pondrá la música, alguien que escribió la historia. ¿Qué opinan de esto? Es una pregunta abierta un poco a los tres. ¿Quién se anima para empezar?
Well, perhaps I give this kind of large overview before Camille and Kope can talk more about IPR side of the industry. So in general, the way we see the regulatory framework in EGDF, we have two types of regulation. And one highly important part is targeting the way you are making games, especially the protection of players. On that side, you have data protection regulation, different rules for protection of minors, data protection regulation, now quickly emerging framework for AI regulation emerging all over the globe. And of course, those are things that developers take extremely seriously and try to follow local regulatory requirements all over the globe. And of course, that's a big challenge. And we are very much welcoming any kind of initiatives trying to harmonize global regulatory framework on these sides. And the second very important topic is then targeting more how you are running your business instead of the ways you are making your games. So on the business side, of course, copyright framework is one of the key areas. That's hopefully Kope and Camille will describe in more detail later. But beyond that, we also have now emerging global digital taxation framework. We already have a number of countries that have the digital VAT or digital sales tax. And now in OECD level, there's a big debate about global digital tax for the companies. In the first phase, of course, targeting global conglomerates like Apple and Google only, luckily. And then beyond that, there are increasing regulations and rules related to climate friendliness of the companies. That's something that you have to take seriously. And of course, everything, for example, on the corporate responsibility side and so on. So there are lots of rules emerging every year from the different regulatory fields, targeting directly or indirectly games.
Yeah, and when it comes to the immaterial property rights, if you're referring to that, inside games, typically there is two ways of dealing with those. So they are inside the employment contract. So basically, when you are employed by a game developer company, you do some creative work. So typically, your creative work is basically considered in the employment contract. So the game developer studio is able to utilize that that creative work you have done. And of course, there is different when it comes to the dealing with, for instance, subcontracting parties. Those are basically agreements. So they are written contracts and which define the IPRs. So that's the common way of doing this. But there is going to be some changes in that regulation in next summer, I guess. So the new directive is covering these fields, and it's going to be implemented separately in all the European Union countries, and we don't know how it is going to be in Finland, and we don't actually know how it is going to be in the other European Union countries when it comes to the IPRs, and that's something which is part of the fragmentation process Ipe mentioned, that this kind of fragmentation makes it very hard for studios to, or it makes it harder for studios to operate in this field.
Yeah, I just have a short comment because this is very new for our sector, but obviously the protection of your IP is incredibly important. Also, when you are getting investment from a body like Enterprise Ireland, the key factor they are looking for is some sort of unique technological IP. And for a lot of immersive technology solutions, it can be difficult to find the part of your workflow or what you have created that is completely unique and is that you have a way to protect this. One example I mentioned previously, Volograms, the volumetric capture studio. They are a spin out from Trinity College here in Dublin. And they have very specific algorithms around the volumetric capture. So they really streamlined this process to have very low poly, but very effective meshes. So volumetric capture is when you bring like a person into a studio and you capture them from multiple cameras. In fact, with Volograms, they only require 8 cameras, whereas like the Microsoft Studio or the Intel Studio, they have thousands of cameras. So this was also part of their unique IP. So Enterprise Ireland, you know, worked with them to find what could be protected within their code, and this is what, you know, we all need education on to be smart about protecting the rights of the work that we create.
Perfecto. Otro tema que creo que puede ser interesante, ¿qué tanto colaboran las diferentes asociaciones y clústeres entre ellas a nivel europeo y con otras a nivel internacional? Estoy pensando, por ejemplo, bueno, finalmente hoy no pudo participar la persona que teníamos por parte de México como representante de una asociación, pero nos gustaría saber si existiría la posibilidad de colaboración, ¿no?, con asociaciones a nivel internacional y específicamente para México. Pregunta abierta nuevamente para los tres.
Yeah. Well,
Go ahead. Oh, okay. Actually, you were reminding me of my colleague who represents games and also works with the Film Centre in Galway, told me about 2 new organizations that I wasn't aware of. So one is the Western AV Forum. There are 30 organizations together to assess the needs of the audiovisual sector in the west of Ireland specifically, and to support their growth. But when you mention international collaborations, they are also a member of the UNESCO City of Film cluster. And this is part of the Creative Cities Network. So there are 17 cities of film, and Galway, Ireland, worked very hard to be part of this list. So there's one example, because the Mexican film industry, my favorite film director is Guillermo del Toro. So I know that Mexico has a thriving film industry. So looking at initiatives like the UNESCO City of Film could be really, really great for Mexico. But the sector in general, the immersive technology sector in Ireland, because of many trade missions, we have very tight links to the UK. And as I mentioned, they have great government support. They have lots of immersive technology hubs called Digital Catapult. These are like labs that industry can come in and they can play and experience all of the possibilities of these mediums. And then they can also work with the people on the ground to develop and design and even implement own immersive technology solution. So there are, tight links amongst between Ireland and the UK, at least in my sector, but also internationally. Now, most of this is, I have a very extensive network, mainly because I like to speak about my industry. So I've been lucky to connect with people from a panel I shared on AWE, and this is, we now meet once a month. So these are creators like myself in the US. So a lot of the relationships that I have are informal, and they're not necessarily through cluster organizations, but that is definitely part of the immersive remit, is to connect with similar cluster organizations for the immersive technology sector around the world. For instance, in Denmark, because I know Mads Dambo, the guy who created that amazing piece that my very first try of virtual reality, they have many VR and AR companies in Denmark have come together to create a group called Black Box, and together they are putting in for a lot of funding for R&D, also to help the theatre industry. So working with a lot of theatre companies in Denmark to help them to upskill, to embrace these new storytelling mediums, and to have everything that they need, to have the support of the technology companies who understand the technological aspects of these mediums, and then they come together with the theatre makers and the storytellers. And Denmark has already supported this with some small funding, but this is exactly what we want to see all across Europe.
Yeah, perhaps just to continue from that, from the really games industry association perspective, there is already lots of existing cooperation on the European level, of course, mainly coming from the European regulatory framework that pushes us to cooperate on the European level a lot. But on the global level, I would say step by step, there is more and more cooperation between associations. And we have this kind of meetings with the global associations once or twice a year, or used to have. Now they are not running because of the outbreak, of course. But if you're going to participate as an association representatives, for example, your trade mission at Gamescom in Germany next year, I'm more than happy to invite you to association meetings and introduce you to the other global associations present in that trade fair, for example. Concrete things, what that global cooperation focuses on. At the moment, it's more about knowledge sharing. There is all the time new rules emerging in different countries. So it's really important for us to have a network where we can ask, like, we heard rumors about new regulatory framework emerging in Mexico. What's really happening? And having a local person to reply to that question, of course, helps a lot. And second important thing is, of course, data. Sharing information on like how your local industry is doing helps us to then share and compare us to other global industry ecosystems. And the third thing, of course, is then related to this kind of just knowledge and contact sharing on like different speakers for the events and so on. So it's at the moment very concrete, but also something that is really needed, because every now and then you have events where you would like to have someone explaining a little bit in more detail what is going on in Europe or what is going on in Mexican games markets.
Yeah, to kind of add a little bit, in European level, we have quite a good connections, and we have associations like HEDF and ISVE in European level, taking care of the networking and sharing the information, and also in the political lobbying side. But then we have had some, let's say, temporary coalitions with, for instance, with Korean game developer organization when it came to the WHO regulation and that kind of stuff. And there is also this kind of bilateral connections between countries. So, for instance, we have been doing quite a lot of cooperation with, for instance, Estonia, which is our neighboring country, but also with Norway. So that there is many different kind of levels in these networks, and some of them are temporary networks, and some of them, like HEDF, ISVE, and for instance Nordic Game Institute, they are this kind of more permanent structures. But this industry, it's older than the immersive technologies industry, but it's still in the developing phase. And I think that we are going to see way more cooperation between individual countries, but we are also going to see more cooperation between higher level also.
Muchas gracias. Quería hacerles una pregunta antes de que entremos una última pregunta antes de que entremos con las del público. Antes han comentado que los grandes jugadores de esta industria ahora mismo estarían en Asia, también en Estados Unidos. Entendemos que los europeos son los que vienen detrás. ¿Qué tan lejos estamos de los grandes jugadores en esta industria? ¿Podremos alcanzarlos? ¿Es un tema de talento? ¿Es un tema de inversión? Cualquiera de los tres, por favor.
Okay, if I go first, I think that when we think about the this kind of scale of power in the world of the gaming at the moment, the truth is that the biggest platforms like Apple, Google, big game companies like Electronic Arts and so on are US based, and then there is in China there is emerging big companies like Tencent and some others, which are basically basically big companies with a high stack. So they have a lot of money to be used, and they have a very big domestic market. And in that sense, since we in Europe, we don't have, for instance, we don't have any this kind of platforms like Apple or Google. That's basically something which differentiates us with the USA. And yeah, but what we do have, we have an excellent content creation, game creation, or that kind of cluster, and developing that cluster and basically trying to get to the even play field with those platform holders through, for instance, EU regulation, which is one of the big topics we have been dealing with lately, is the way we can sustainably grow the European games industry. But this is a complicated story, and this is a situation which is not ideal when it comes to the European game development scene in that sense.
Yeah, just to continue on that, as Papel said, Europe in general has lost its game on the platform side and digital distribution level. But what Europe really leads in many ways is actually the content side. And to go a bit more detail, it's Europe actually has some of the biggest powerhouses globally on mobile games markets, like King, that originally from Sweden, Supercell and Rovio from Finland, of course. And also, if you think about console game markets, some of the biggest companies creating this kind of AAA games with a budget of tens of millions of euros, even going now to the film side, is, for example, CD Projekt Red with the Witcher series from Poland, or Remini from Finland, really pushing the boundaries of games as a medium of artistic expression, or Quantic Dream from France. And on online game side, German companies on the last decade used to be really big when those markets were really flourishing still, like InnoGames, etc. So yeah, Europe is not really behind. Now the question is, how are we going to secure that we stay ahead and we stay equal on competing on that side? And that's unfortunately in many ways is going back to the funding and securing that there is funding for the small studios to actually enter the markets, still funding for the studios to grow up and scale up their activities. And also what is really lacking is this kind of high level risk funding, when you need hundreds of millions of euros in capital really to get your company to the next level. That kind of funding usually happens at the moment through acquisition of the European companies by global powerhouses like Tencent from China. So how to build this kind of funding framework for the European studios that enables all those steps to be taken? That's most likely a topic for another big long session discussion, but that's definitely a challenge. And also the talent. That's actually also something that Europe at the moment has huge opportunities. It's increasingly difficult to actually move to the United States. So if we are in Europe, are able to keep the borders open, we are able to also secure that the best minds over the globe are able to move to Europe and help us to create the best companies and conquer the markets.
Yes, so in relation to the immersive technology sector, the big players are, well, the UK, of course, they're not part of Europe very soon. So, but they invested very heavily since 2009 in the sector, and the value of the market in the UK is 160 billion. And the US are the really big players. So the industry, the immersive technology sector or immersive media sector is worth 717 billion. And that was last year in 2019. So I agree with everything that Jari and Kupi said about the big boys, and how does Europe, or specifically like smaller games or immersive technology companies, how do they compete? And I agree with Jari what he mentioned about talent. So we have a very, I can only really speak for Ireland and what I've seen for working here all my life, but we have a really talented pool of both artists and technologists because of Google, Apple, Amazon, LinkedIn, Airbnb, all multinationals are in Ireland, mainly because of tax incentives, but we're very grateful for them because we have a very strong, very smart, very tech savvy people workplace. So the important thing now is that the skills for this particular sector are supported, and I'm delighted to say that Immersive Technology SkillNet has just been formed. So SkillNet is a really interesting match funding model from government. So it's 50-50 match funding. The SkillNet can be set up for any industry. So there's a very vibrant animation SkillNet. There's one for like the film industry, for the radio industry. So and not just the arts, but also many other sectors. So anybody can set up a SkillNet, and then they just follow a particular business model, and they get 50% support from the government, and then they create training programs which provides the other 50%, or else they create sponsorship or kind of partnership situation. So we've just set this up now in Ireland. So Susan Dalton is the network manager there. So it's again, it's early days, but this is going to be so key. So Immersive are linking in very closely with Immersive Technology SkillNet so that we can communicate what the industry needs on the ground. So yes, talent is key, but also I'm very passionate about upskilling people from creative sectors like theatre and film. So these people have such an understanding of their industry, and actually there's a lot of transferable skills to immersive technology. So theatre makers, they understand spatial mediums because they've always worked in a spatial medium, and then film industry, they're well set to adopt the 360 camera and all the possibilities that come with 360 cameras. So there is, some upskilling to happen, but bodies like Immersive Technology SkillNet in Ireland will help to make that possible.
I would like to add something. Nothing is forever, although the situation at the moment is that we are basically a little bit on